Hi friends, Kathryn Korostoff here from Research Rockstar. Thanks for joining me today for another conversation for Research Rockstars. And today we're going to talk about in-depth interviews and specifically my suggestions for handling two of the most common issues that people have when conducting in-depth interviews today. These are based on questions that we do get from Research Rockstar students. And for those of you who are students at Research Rockstar, I want to point out that these two topics are also covered in the job aid on IDI tips that is available for download from the training portal from the course on conducting research interviews, project design and management. So with that, let's talk about two issues related to conducting professional quality in-depth interviews. Issue number one, how to make sure we're not getting over-rationalized responses. Issue number two, what to do when we get responses where the respondent seems to be contradicting themselves. So the first issue is about over-rationalization, and that is really a data quality issue, right? If I'm conducting research interviews and the answers that people are giving me are clearly over-rationalized, they're probably not accurate. People might be, for various reasons, like social desirability bias, trying to portray themselves as more rational than they are, or portray themselves as healthier than they are, or whatever the aspiration might be reflecting. And so when we're conducting an interview, we can have that experience of realizing that what we're hearing is probably not reality. It's probably being over-rationalized. So what do we do? So here's a couple of scenarios. Let's imagine that you're doing research on kitchen blenders, and you're one of the areas of investigation has to do with really understanding how people use blenders. Okay, that we don't want to be making any assumptions about it. We really want to get a fresh look and really explore all of the different ways people use their countertop kitchen blenders. So let's imagine that we're in an interview. We ask somebody this question, and they talk about how much they like making healthy soups for their family. Well, maybe that seems genuine and authentic, but maybe we kind of get the sense that that might be a little bit biased, that we're not really getting the full story, that they're projecting themselves in a certain way. They're saying, oh, I like to prepare healthy foods for my family, and so I really use the blender for making healthy soups. All right. So one option we have is to probe on them a little bit by giving them permission to revise their answer. So in this case, I might say something like, hey, thanks for explaining how you use the blender. Of course, I know how busy you must be as a working mom. So thinking about the last time you used the blender, was it similar? Was it for making soup, or was it for doing something else? And now you've sort of given them permission to step away from that rationalized view of themselves. Now they might admit, well, I do sometimes make healthy soups, but I also do a lot of smoothies. I also use it for hummus. I use it for making milkshakes. And so I've given them permission to kind of revise their answer and give me a more complete answer. Another option is to sort of use the idea of what other people are saying, kind of, again, sort of permission, but sort of with the angle of what I hear from other people. So in this case, I might say, hey, thanks for explaining how you use your blender. I've spoken to several other people about this topic, and I've heard some really unexpected ways people use them. Might you have any thoughts about why I'm hearing such different answers? And again, just sort of using some language like that gives them that permission of, oh, other people are showing a wider variety of things. Oh, well, yeah, I bet you're hearing that because, maybe it's varying by occasion. Like, I do mostly use it for making soup, except, if it's somebody's birthday, in my household, we always make milkshakes on birthdays. And, just last week, I was making mint chocolate chip cookie milkshakes or whatever. So again, just using sort of the idea that other people have given different responses might give them permission. And so when we probe, we want to make sure that we're giving them a chance to answer again. And we want to do it in a way where they're going to be comfortable revealing a more complete answer. So hopefully those examples will come in handy. Another thing that can come up is that I do want to point out about over-rationalization is really specific to B2B research, where one of the challenges is that if you ask in a B2B case, how they do something, or what their best practice is for something, or what their process is for a particular business behavior, you will often get a sanctioned process or the official answer, and that might not be the real answer. So for example, if you are doing B2B research, you might ask about, you might be asking about a specific process. And for example, you get a response about escalating issues. The CX team has a 6-step process for escalating when a specific KPI is missed. Okay, well, what happened the last time that KPI was missed? And you find out that in reality, they only do the first 2 steps, that the 6-step process isn't followed. But when you initially ask them, what's your process for blah, 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 you get the sort of official answer. And so when you're doing B2B interviews, you always have to be listening for, am I getting the official sanctioned process? Am I getting the official company documented best practices on something? Or am I actually hearing how this individual does it in real life or thinks about it in real life? And it can get complicated because in business, there can be a difference between company policies and what the actual doers and implementers of those policies do in real life. And sometimes you actually want both. Sometimes you want to know, okay, what's the company's official policy? Okay, now what happens in reality? Just be clear about what is going to be important for your project. Which of those do you need? Do you need both? Do you just need the policy? Do you just need reality? So somewhat related to the issue of over-rationalization is the issue of what to do when people are giving us contradictory information. And the reason why that's somewhat related is because sometimes people give us contradictory information because they are sort of mixing between what they're trying to show and how they really behave. So for example, if you're doing IDIs on an exercise or health related topic, you might find that they're saying, oh yes, I exercise 3 times a week for at least 40 minutes time. And these are all the wonderful healthy things I do when I'm exercising. And then later they admit that when they exercise, every time they get up to exercise, they just feel thwarted. They just get distracted. There's always something that prevents them from exercising. Okay, so you've got a lot of deterrents to exercise, but earlier you said that you exercise 3 times a week. You have to be careful about calling out those kinds of contradictions. But if you hear contradictions as the researcher, if it's at all possible, you do want to probe on those. Now, if you are dealing with a participant who's particularly unfriendly, you may not be comfortable with that, and that may be fine. But if you are dealing with somebody who's reasonably engaged in the interview, it's totally appropriate to, in a very warm and friendly way, to probe on it. So here's an example. I recall that earlier you mentioned getting too many email notifications. And just now you said you want more email notifications from the XYZ Performance Monitor. Can you help me understand how these points relate to each other? So I'm not saying, you gave me contradictory information. I'm just saying you said A, you said B. I know these relate. Can you help me understand? And by the way, that phrase is very intentional. Can you help me? Believe it or not, people like to help. And so when you couch your probe that way, when you sort of put it into that frame of you're helping me, then that encourages them to give a response. And so you would be helping me if you can help me understand how point A goes with point B. So that's an effective tool. Now, if you are in a situation where you just don't think it's going to be well received to do any probing on contradictory information, then just note what the contradiction is and be on the alert for it with other interviews. Like, is this coming up over and over again, that people are telling you one thing about exercise and then later they're giving you this totally contradictory information about exercise? That could be an interesting result in and of itself that's going to be worth reporting on. And also, the other thing to keep in mind is if you are in your first couple of interviews and you're seeing some information that's coming up that you feel is being over-rationalized or that tends to be result in contradictory responses, go back to your interview guide and reflect on the writing of the questions and see if you might be able to clarify a bit, if there's something that you can do in the way the questions are worded. A little bit more consistency in the responses because you've given them that permission to give you really complete answers. So go back to the interview guide and see if there's something you might be able to improve there in order to make sure that you're not getting over-rationalized answers or contradictory answers. But probing is totally a part of our job when we're moderating, facilitating. And so it's something that I think for people who are newer to doing in-depth interviews, it can feel a little uncomfortable to get a response and then ask for a clarification, but it's totally appropriate. The other thing you could do in these situations, and we offer several tips for different ways of doing this in the course, but just briefly for today, the other thing you can do is use a confirmation. So if somebody's reporting something that you think is over-rationalized or contradictory, it's absolutely okay for you to say, okay, thank you so much for sharing that. So let me just state this back to you to make sure I'm fully understanding. And and your style may be different. My style, sometimes I'll just pretend I'm kind of falling on my sword a bit. And make sure I'm fully understanding. I'm sorry, I'm new to this topic. So can you help me? Let me just restate what I think I'm hearing from you, and you can tell me whether or not I got it right. I think what I'm hearing from you is that you really use your blender to make healthy soups, but you also use it for making milkshakes and hummus and pesto. Is that right? So I've given them that opportunity to correct me and make sure that I've done a good job of, understanding truly what their behavior is. And I know that's a very simple example, but hopefully it's a model that many people can relate to. I hope that was a useful conversation. Again, for those of you who are students, there's 7 more tips in that particular document. And if you have any questions for me, do let me know. And thanks again for watching Conversations for Research Rockstars.